Hey there guys, welcome back to Nerdy Treasures. Coming up is my Royal Selangor statue collection. So aside from the Black Series, Royal Selangor is probably the company that I have the most amount of stuff from. If you haven't heard of Royal Selangor, they're a Malaysian based company and they specialise in pewter metal statues. Now when I think of Nerdy Treasures, this is what I think of. They're metal, they're shiny, they're heavy. So I wanted to shoot a tour of just my Royal Selangor statues, and I thought just for shits and giggles we'd rank them as we go. Now I have quite a few of these pieces, some big, some small, and so I've tried to factor in scale and price when ranking these so we don't just end up with all the super expensive pieces in the top spots. But it's all just a bit of fun, so let's get into it. Coming in last then, but by no means least, is the Star Wars TIE Fighter. Now when I started looking at this thing, I almost bumped out the list just by looking at it and admiring all of the tiny details. I was like, how can I put this last on my list? But it's actually only one of two vehicles that I have from Royal Selangor, and apparently I just prefer sort of the character sculpt, so that's probably why this has ended up at the bottom. But like I said, the details on this thing are phenomenal. You've got the nice base there that's just kicked off to an angle, so you get this real impression of the TIE Fighter flying. And what's great about this base is you can either have it low down or high up, so depending on the amount of shelf space you've got, you have options there. Next up is the Darth Maul figurine. Now a lot of these Star Wars character pieces, they tend to just have the figure and quite a sort of simple base on this one, whereas some of the Marvel ones, they tend to be a bit more creative with the base. The figure itself has a really nice pose. You can see there's a lot of movement, particularly through the legs. You can feel like he's about to spring into his next pose. He's got his arm reached out, saying, come on! The finish on this thing is quite matte compared to other statues that I have. Usually you get a bit of variation in the finish of the pewter. Sometimes you get shinier parts and matte parts to sort of show where these things aren't painted. They sometimes use those finishes to show the different materials and things like that. But here I guess it's mostly representing cloth and skin and things like that, so it works in this context. Perhaps the lightsaber hilt and maybe the lightsaber itself could have had a bit of more of a sheen to it. But yeah, on the whole, I do really like this piece, and it has a nice presence up on the shelf. Now for this next one, I feel really bad putting it so far down the list because it's a really impressive piece. This is the Spider-Man figurine, and like I said, really impressive. A great sculpt on the base. You've got this lovely brick texture on there. The concept is great. He's clearly quite high up. You've got the ladder on the base there and the sort of balcony rail to show that, and you get this sense that the gravity is pulling him down, but he's using his powers to sort of keep himself on the side of the building, his sticky hand and his sticky feet. The only thing that pulls this down for me is one of the knees is just weirdly long and thin, and every time I look at this thing I can't not see it. So that's why Spider-Man has been pulled down the list so much, because it is an otherwise fantastic statue. Next up is the BB-8 container. More of a lower end piece, this one. With Royal Selangor, sometimes they like to make their pieces functional, so this one is actually a container. You lift the head off and you've got somewhere to hide. I don't know what you're going to put in there, but for me this just sits on the shelf as a statue. There's something about just the nice shiny orbish nature of this thing. BB-8 I think was a great design. I think it was one of the best things to come out of the sequel trilogy. Nice sculpt lines in this. You've got some indented areas that are just sort of a matte black colour, which gives a nice bit of contrast here and there. Nice details on the head of this thing, and the bottom is sort of weighted so that he sort of sits the way he's supposed to without needing a base, which I quite like. Next we have the R2-D2 canister. This is another functional piece. You lift the head up, you've got somewhere to store your secrets, your Death Star plans, what have you. But a lovely amount of detail on this one, where you don't have the whites and the blues that we're so used to. There's so many sculpt lines in this thing, which help represent those parts. I think the legs on this thing look really impressive. We have the wires down here, a real sort of precision, machined, mechanical feel to this thing. Because the head does lift off, you've got a tiny little bit of articulation on this statue, so the head can sort of face whichever way you want, which I think is very handy. I love all the little black shading areas they've got around some of the knobs and the eye and things like that on this one. It just serves to enhance the sculpt a little bit here and there. Yeah, really great piece. Next up we have the Iron Man figurine. Now this could be like a trophy or something. Supremely high polished finish on this thing. It's really nice and shiny. Nice powerful pose. He's got his arms stretched out, ready to shoot his repulsor blast. This is one of those statues where the more I look at it, the more I see. You haven't just got simple metal plates all over the suit. There's vents here and there. There's repulsors, hinges on like the arms and the legs. Yeah, bags of detail. Base is nice on this one, quite interesting, sort of generic Stark Tech sort of stuff, I guess. Again, it's in that flat black, which a lot of these bases are, but it's nice that it's not just a flat plate. It gives him that ability to have a sort of more dynamic pose with his leg up like that. Yeah, brilliant piece, love it. Next up is the 24 karat gold plated Grogu. Now this is a relatively lower end piece compared to some of the larger statues, but obviously it's 24 karat gold, so it commands a slightly higher price tag than something of its size. But the finish on this thing is just what makes it. You've got that lovely shiny gold throughout, obviously, but they've done these different finishes on it. So the head's a real nice high gloss shine, and the clothes have this more matte finish to represent like the ragginess of the clothes. And then they've done his eyes with this black finish, which just lets them pop out of that gold. Base is nice on this one. They haven't just gone for a simple flat base. It's sort of a nod to his pram, and so you've got a few little hints of details on there. But obviously the main bit of this is this lovely gold Grogu, which just pops off of my shelf. Heading back to Marvel then with the Thor. I think this was my first ever Royal Selangor piece, and still one of my favourites. I could talk about this statue for hours. The pose, variation on the finishes on this. So you've got a nice shiny gloss on like things like the hammer and his arms, more of a matte finish on like the leather of his suit. His cape they've done with this real deep dark finish on the pewter, and the sculpt of this cape is incredible. And where they've got that finish on it, they've been able to sort of give highlights to some of the creases on it, and just gives it tons of presence. You really get the sense that he's just landed. His cape is sort of still billowing out, and base on this one, really nice. They've got that sort of Asgardian pattern on the floor where he's just landed through the Bifrost, obviously crashing Mjolnir down to the ground. Fantastic piece. Next up we have another statue that could easily be a trophy. It's the 24 karat gold plated C3PO. Now this thing literally looks like an Oscar. And the lovely thing about this one is obviously 3PO is gold. So this works as a great C3PO statue in its own right. And they've even left the lower part of his right leg unplated, so it still has that silvery pewter look, just like in the films. And they've left the midriff unplated as well. So you get the nice silverness of the wires and the mechanical parts offset against this sort of black shading. Lots of nice little details as well, like the pistons on the arms. Look fragile, they're not, because it's solid pewter. Fairly simple base on this one. You've got like the waviness of the desert, but it would have been nice if they had a bit of sand texture in there just to represent that. But the meat and the potatoes of this thing, I guess, is the 3PO, and perhaps the flatness of the base helps this thing stand out a little bit more. This is probably the thing on my shelf that stands out at me above anything else. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are down to the top three, and we have the Wolverine statue. Now this is one that I just love looking at. So many different finishes on this thing. You've sort of got a nice sort of clean metal on like the claws and the head sculpt. For the bodysuit, they've done this dark wash on it and then rubbed back some of the higher points of the details. So you have this lovely texture on his suit, but also his arms. You can see like his arm hair sort of on there, and that's just done through sculpting and shading. And the musculature on this looks so good. They've done a really nice job sculpting this one. The base is great, probably one of my favourite bases on any of these pieces. It's like a sentinel head that he's clearly just decapitated and now he's just trampling all over. The pose is great, it's just so intimidating, so Wolverine. There's something about a Wolverine statue when he has his arms out like that and his claws out, and just gives it such great shelf presence. At number 2 then, we have the Superman Action Comics #1 in the 24 karat gold. Now, I'll admit, I'm not the biggest Superman fan, which tells you how good this statue is. So Royal Selangor have done a bunch of these now, but this was the first one they did, and the concept is whatever superhero it is, it's their first appearance, and they're bursting out of the comic book. So this was the first one they did, and it's obviously Action Comics #1. And so I really wanted to have this one in my collection. They released it in a standard pewter, and they released it in this 24 karat gold version, and I obviously went with this one, and I'm really glad I did. In the standard one, the comic has colour on it. On this one, the comic is black and white, and it just allows the gold of that figure to just pop out. It's a really great idea, and this one is just a great execution. The sculpt on Superman is terrific. They've added all these bits of shading in the musculature, which just aids the sculpt really, and they've done the same on the cape. And a really great sculpt on the cape too. Royal Selangor just seem to nail capes. Such a unique piece. You've got him holding aloft like part of a car above his head, which is done in the same colour that they do the bases in, just to put the emphasis on the character. Again, the base is that flat black. We have the nice Superman logo on it. The print work on the comic book itself is really nice. They've done this sort of retro dot work on it. And the gold is not like the gold that we had on like my Grogu or the 3PO. It's sort of done in this retro patina style, which is just so pleasing to look at. Nice plaque on the back just to commemorate the comic book, which is a nice little touch. It just adds something and it just makes it feel even more special than it is. Finally then, we're at the end of the list, and the top spot goes to the pod racing diorama. Now, I might be a little bit biased being such a big Episode 1 fan, but you cannot deny that this thing looks awesome. The amount of detail on these things, the tiny little intricate bits of detail on the pod racers, it's just phenomenal. And they've used a lot of shading in here to help bring those tiny bits of detail out. They've also done some like clever things with the finish on the pod racer, where they're not able to show, say, the oranges and the blacks of Sebulba's pod racer. They've used different finishes, so you've got high gloss, you've got sort of a more matte finish, just to represent those differences in colour. This is the only piece that I own where they've used something other than like the silvers of the pewter or the gold. They've actually added a bit of paint to this one, to the energy binders. You've got a nice pink finish on those, which is nice. It just adds a little something to it. It's also the only statue that I own where they haven't used a flat black for the base. Now, I'm kind of in two minds about this, because I think the black would have allowed the pod racers to pop out a little bit more. We have a nice commemorative plate on the back. Again, they don't have to do that. We'll never see it, but it just makes it feel a bit more special. We've got a teeny tiny Anakin and Sebulba sat in their pods, which, considering their size, are sculpted quite nicely. The cables of the pods are just very sturdy and very strong. It's solid metal. It's never going to bend or go anywhere. We have a nice sense of movement where you've got the energy binders slightly offset from each other. It gives the engines like a sense of movement. You can almost imagine them bashing into each other, jostling for position. So yeah, the pod racing diorama, one of the prides of my Royal Selangor collection, and in fact my whole collection room in general. I love this piece. It'll probably be one of the last pieces I ever sell, if I ever have to sell the collection. So that wraps up my Royal Selangor collection tour. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully it taught you about some pieces that you might not have otherwise known existed. It's not something I hear about on social media much or see in collection videos. But if you do own some, let me know which is your favourite. Is there any you recommend picking up? Let me know in the comments. It'd be great to know. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I'm trying to do a video a week at the moment and we seem to be keeping up the momentum, which is good. But that's all for today. Catch you next time.